High Matriarch Valandra stood at the window of her private chambers, gazing out at the aurora-filled sky of Silthara. The crystalline walls of her palace caught and reflected the dancing lights, creating patterns that had mesmerized her people for millennia. But tonight, the ancient beauty brought her no peace. Betty Morrison sat in a chair made of living crystal that had molded itself to fit her human form. The events of the day had left her emotionally drained, and she was still trying to process the fact that she had somehow passed all 3 tests. Jake and Zara had been dismissed hours ago, leaving the 2 mothers alone to speak privately. "You are wondering why I requested this meeting," Valandra said without turning from the window. Little, Betty admitted. "I thought you would announce your decision about the bonding and send us on our way." Valandra finally turned, and Betty was surprised to see uncertainty in those ancient silver eyes. The High Matriarch, who had seemed so confident and intimidating during the test, now looked tired and strangely vulnerable. "Tell me about your son's childhood," Valandra said, settling into a chair across from Betty. "What was it like to raise him alone?" The request caught Betty off guard. "It was hard sometimes. After my husband died, I had to work 2 jobs to keep us afloat. There were nights when I fell asleep at the kitchen table, exhausted from trying to be both mother and father to Jake. Yet he grew up to be a fine man," Valandra observed. "Intelligent, compassionate, brave enough to love someone from another species. How did you accomplish this?" Betty shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just loved him. When he was scared, I held him. When he was excited about something, I listened. When he made mistakes, I helped him learn from them. Nothing fancy or complicated. Love." Valandra repeated the word as if it were foreign to her. "You speak of it as if it were a simple thing. It is simple," Betty said. "Not easy, but simple. You put someone else's happiness before your own, and you never give up on them. No matter what." Valandra was quiet for a long moment, her luminescent skin flickering through subtle changes of color that Betty had learned indicated deep thought. "Among my people, children are raised by the community. They are educated by specialists, trained by experts, guided by those with the most knowledge and ability. Personal attachment is considered a distraction from their development." "That sounds very efficient," Betty said carefully, sensing that there was more to this conversation than casual curiosity. "It is efficient," Valandra agreed. "Our children grow up intelligent, disciplined, and capable. They master complex telepathic techniques before they reach adolescence. They understand science and philosophy and art in ways that would amaze." "Your species? But?" Betty prompted, hearing the unspoken word in the matriarch's voice. Valandra turned back to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the crystal. "But they do not laugh. They do not run through meadows for the joy of feeling grass beneath their feet. They do not wake up in the middle of the night crying from bad dreams, seeking comfort in their mother's arms." Betty felt a pang of sympathy for the alien ruler. "You've been watching the recordings of my family, haven't you? You're diplomatic. Escort provided cultural materials to help me understand human bonding practices," Valandra said, her voice carefully neutral. "Among those materials were recordings of your interactions with your grandchildren." Betty smiled, remembering the videos that Jake had sent to help Zara understand human family dynamics. "Those kids keep me on my toes. Little Tommy is 7 now, and he's convinced he's going to be a space pilot like his Uncle Jake. Sophie is 5 and thinks she can talk to flowers. I watched you read them stories before sleep." Valandra said quietly, "I watched you bandage a scraped knee and kiss it to make it better. I watched you laugh at their silly jokes and catch them when they jump from playground equipment. They're good kids," Betty said, wondering where this conversation was leading. "Zarathiel was raised according to our traditions," Valandra continued. "From the moment she could walk, she was trained in mental discipline and telepathic control. She learned to meditate before she learned to play. She mastered 17 different forms of psychic communication before her 10th birthday. She turned out wonderful," Betty said sincerely. Jake couldn't have found a better partner, but she never had a childhood, Velandra said, and Betty heard deep regret in her voice. She never made mud pies, or chased butterflies, or believed in fairy tales. She never came running to me with skin knees or exciting discoveries. She was always the perfect little aristocrat, always controlled, always proper. Betty began to understand. You're not really worried about humans being inferior, are you? You're worried about losing her. Velandra's composure finally cracked, and she covered her face with her hands. I have ruled 12 star systems for 3 centuries. I have negotiated peace treaties and commanded fleets and shaped the destiny of billions of souls. But I have never been anyone's mother in the way that you have been to Jake. Oh, honey, Betty said, rising from her chair to kneel beside the alien ruler. Being a mother isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. I gave Zarathiel everything I thought she needed, Velandra said, her voice muffled by her hands. Education, training, status, power. But I never gave her what she truly wanted. What did she want? To be loved for who she was, not what she could become, Velandra said, looking up with tears in her silver eyes. I watched those recordings of your family, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw children who were happy simply because someone loved them unconditionally. Betty sat on the arm of Velandra's chair, gently patting the alien woman's shoulder. It's not too late, you know? Zara still needs her mother. How can I compete? With your warmth and acceptance? Velandra asked. You welcomed her into your family without hesitation. You made her feel valued and cherished in ways I never learned how to do. You don't have to compete, Betty said firmly. Love isn't a contest. There's room in Zara's heart for both of us. Velandra wiped her eyes, trying to regain her composure. I have been alone for so long. Arthurian leaders are expected to maintain emotional distance to make difficult decisions without bias. I convinced myself that isolation was strength. Isolation is just lonely, Betty said. Trust me, I know. After my husband died, I thought I had to be strong and independent all the time. It took me years to realize that letting people help me didn't make me weak. Your husband, Velandra said. Tell me about him. Betty's face softened with memory. Robert was a good man. Not perfect, but good. He made me laugh every day, even when times were tough. He used to sing in the shower, terribly off-key, and it drove me crazy. I'd give anything to hear that awful singing one more time. You still love him, Velandra observed. Always will, Betty said simply. Love doesn't die just because people do. It changes, but it doesn't disappear. I had a bonded partner once, Velandra said quietly. Centuries ago. She died in the plague that swept through our outer colonies. I told myself that I could not afford to grieve, that my people needed me to be strong. Did you love her? More than life itself, Velandra whispered. But I buried that love along with her. I convinced myself that emotional attachments were weaknesses that I could not afford. Betty took the alien woman's glowing hand in her own weathered one. The strongest people I know are the ones who love the most. It takes real courage to keep your heart open when the world keeps trying to break it. I fear I have forgotten how to love, Velandra said. I fear I have become so focused on duty and responsibility that I have lost the ability to simply be happy. Love is like riding a bicycle, Betty said with a gentle smile. You never really forget how. You just need to practice a little. I do not understand this reference to bicycles, Velandra said, confused. Betty laughed. It's a human saying. It means that some skills become part of you, even if you don't use them for a while. Love is like that. Once you know how to love, it's always there inside you, waiting for the right moment to come back. Velandra was quiet for a long time, processing this concept. When Zarathiel told me she wanted to bond with a human, my first thought was not about cultural differences or genetic compatibility. My first thought was that she would leave me behind. She doesn't have to leave you behind, Betty said. We could be family together. Not just because our children are bonding, but because we choose to be. You would want that? Velandra asked, surprised. Even though I've been cold and unwelcoming to you? You've been protecting your daughter the only way you knew how, Betty said. I respect that. Any mother who loves their child enough to challenge a stranger gets points in my book. I have watched you with Jake and Zara, Velandra said. The way you make them both feel safe and valued. I confess that I am envious of your ability to create. Such warmth? It's not a special ability, Betty said. It's just practice. Lots and lots of practice at putting love into action every single day. Could you teach me? Velandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Teach you what? How to be a mother instead of just a ruler. How to love my daughter. The way she deserves to be loved. Betty smiled, feeling tears prick her own eyes. Honey, nothing would make me happier. But you don't need to learn how to love Zara. You already love her. You just need to learn how to show it. Asterisk. The crystal palace of Velandra rose from the clouds like a frozen waterfall, its translucent walls capturing and reflecting the aurora light that danced across Silthara's sky. Betty Morrison followed the group of Etherian escorts through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, trying not to gawk at the impossible beauty surrounding her. Every surface was carved from living crystal that sang softly as they passed, creating harmonies that made her skin tingle. High, matriarch Velandra walked ahead of them, her silver robes flowing like liquid starlight. She had not spoken since their arrival, but Betty could feel the weight of her attention like a physical presence. Jake and Zara walked beside her, both tense with worry about what was to come. The testing chamber, announced one of the escorts as they stopped before massive doors made of deep blue crystal. The doors opened without any visible mechanism, revealing a circular room with walls that seemed to stretch up into infinity. Betty, Morrison of Earth, Velandra said, turning to face her with those ancient silver eyes. You wish to join your family line with that of my daughter. This is not a request I take lightly. I understand, Your Majesty, Betty said, still unsure of the proper way to address the alien ruler. You do not understand, Velandra replied, her voice carrying a note of cold authority. You are a primitive emotional creature from a young species that has barely learned to travel between stars. My daughter is heir to a civilization that has existed for 50,000 years. What makes you think your bloodline is worthy of mixing with ours? Betty felt her temper flare at the dismissive words, but she remembered Lisa's advice about honesty being valued above all else. Because I love Jake, and he loves Zara, and that's worth more than all the years or technology in the universe. Velandra's eyes narrowed, and Betty felt a strange pressure in her mind, as if someone was gently probing the edges of her thoughts. Love, the High Matriarch said with obvious disdain, a chaotic emotion that clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. Among my people, we value mental clarity and logical thinking. Then why are you testing me instead of just saying no? Betty asked, surprising herself with her boldness. For the first time, Velandra seemed taken aback by the human's directness. Because my daughter has requested this bonding, and I will not deny her without proof that it is impossible. You will undergo the traditional test that all potential family members must pass. If you succeed, I will consider your request. If you fail, you will return to your primitive world and never contact my daughter again. Jake started to protest, but Zara placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was bigger than their personal feelings now. This was about proving that humans deserved a place in the greater galactic community. What are the tests? Betty asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 3 trials, Velandra announced. First, you must navigate the crystal maze using only your intuition. Second, you must participate in a telepathic meditation circle without disrupting the harmony. Third, you must prepare a ceremonial meal that represents the joining of our families. Fail any one of these, and the bonding cannot proceed. The first test began immediately. Betty found herself standing at the entrance to a labyrinth made of crystal walls that shifted and changed even as she watched. The maze seemed to glow with its own inner light, casting confusing shadows that made it impossible to judge distances or directions. "There is no map," Velandra explained. "The maze responds to the heart and mind of the one who enters. You must find your way to the center, using only your human intuition." Betty took a deep breath and stepped into the maze. The crystal walls immediately shifted around her, blocking the path she had just taken. She could hear her footsteps echoing strangely. As if the sound was being filtered through layers of music. At first, Betty tried to use logic to solve the puzzle. She attempted to map the passages in her mind, to find patterns in the shifting walls. But every time she thought she understood the maze's rules, they changed. Dead ends appeared where corridors had been moments before. Passages that had led forward suddenly curved back on themselves. After an hour of frustration, Betty stopped and leaned against a crystal wall. She was lost, confused, and beginning to think that this whole journey had been a mistake. Then she remembered the meditation training that Lisa had given her on the ship. Maybe logic wasn't the answer here. Betty closed her eyes and tried to empty her mind of all the fears and doubts that were clouding her judgment. She thought about why she was here, about Jake's happiness and Zara's gentle kindness. She thought about the love that had brought two different species together across the vast emptiness of space. When she opened her eyes, the maze looked different. The constantly shifting walls seemed less chaotic now, more like a dance than a trap. Betty began to move again, not thinking about where she was going, but simply following the feeling in her heart that told her which direction felt right. She found herself moving faster now, turning left when her instinct said left, going straight when straight felt correct. The crystal walls hummed around her, and she realized they were responding to her emotional state. When she felt confident and peaceful, the passages opened up. When doubt crept in, the walls closed together. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Betty emerged into a circular chamber at the center of the maze. Velandra was waiting for her, a look of surprise flickering across her normally impassive features. "Interesting," the High Matriarch said. "Most candidates require several attempts to complete the maze. You found the center on your first try. I stopped trying to think my way through it," Betty explained. "Sometimes the heart knows things that the mind doesn't." The second test took place in a meditation chamber, where a circle of Etherian elders sat in perfect silence. Their minds were linked in telepathic harmony, creating a network of shared consciousness that hummed with psychic energy. Betty could feel the power radiating from them, even though she had no telepathic abilities of her own. "You must join the circle without disrupting our mental harmony," Velandra explained. "If your chaotic human emotions disturb our meditation, you will fail this test." Betty sat down in the empty space between two of the elders, feeling terribly out of place. These beings had spent centuries learning to control their thoughts and emotions, and she was just a retired school teacher from Denver. How was she supposed to match their mental discipline? The elders began their meditation, and Betty felt the strange sensation of their linked minds pressing against her consciousness. She couldn't read their thoughts, but she could sense the deep peace and unity that connected them. It was beautiful and alien and completely beyond her human understanding. At first, Betty tried to make her mind as blank and peaceful as theirs. But human brains weren't designed for the kind of mental emptiness that came naturally to Etherians. Her thoughts kept wandering to Jake, to her garden back home, to the grocery list she had left on her kitchen counter. Then she realized something important. The elders weren't asking her to become like them. They were asking her not to disrupt their harmony. Maybe the key wasn't to empty her mind, but to fill it with the kind of thoughts that would complement their peaceful meditation. Betty began to think about the things that brought her the most peace and joy. She thought about Jake's laughter as a child, about the satisfaction of watching her flowers bloom, about the quiet contentment of a well-cooked meal shared with people she loved. She let her mind fill with warm, gentle emotions that radiated outward like the glow from a fireplace docked. To her amazement, the meditation circle's harmony didn't break. Instead, it seemed to deepen and strengthen, as if her human warmth was adding a new dimension to their mental unity. When the session ended, several of the elders looked at her with something approaching respect. "Your emotions are indeed chaotic," one of them said, "but they are also beautiful in their own way. You have given us a gift we did not expect." Third test required Betty to prepare a ceremonial meal that would symbolize the joining of human and Etherian families. She was led to a kitchen that looked more like a laboratory, filled with devices that could synthesize food from pure energy and create dishes that existed in multiple dimensions at once. "I don't know how to use any of this," Betty said, staring at the alien equipment. "Then use what you do know," Valandra said. "The meal must represent both our peoples and the harmony between them." Betty thought about the problem for a long time. How could she create something that honored both human and Etherian traditions when she barely understood what those traditions were? Then she remembered something Zara had said about her people consuming light-based nutrients along with regular food. Working with the kitchen staff, Betty prepared a simple meal that reflected both cultures. She made her famous pot roast, but she had the Etherian cooks infuse it with harmless bioluminescent compounds that made it glow with soft blue light. She baked bread that sparkled like stars, and she created a salad of earth vegetables arranged to look like the constellation where Jake and Zara had first met. The meal wasn't fancy or sophisticated by Etherian standards, but it was made with love and careful thought about what it represented. When Asterisk readable, "This is not what I expected," she said finally. Asterisk. The starship Golden Horizon was unlike anything Betty Morrison had ever imagined. As she stood in the observation deck watching Earth shrink to a tiny blue dot behind them, she felt a mixture of wonder and terror that made her grip the railing with white knuckles. 3 days ago, she had been watering her garden in Denver, and now she was traveling faster than light toward an alien world to meet her future daughter-in-law's mother. "Are you feeling all right, Mrs. Morrison?" asked Dr. Lisa Chong, the ship's cultural attaché, who had been assigned to help Betty prepare for the journey. Lisa was a young woman with kind eyes and endless patience, qualities that Betty desperately needed as she tried to understand the complexities of Etherian society. "Just Betty, please," Betty said, forcing herself to release her death grip on the railing. "And yes, I'm fine. Just trying to wrap my head around all this." Jake and Zara had gone to their quarters to rest, leaving Betty alone with her thoughts and fears. The ship would take 5 days to reach Silthara, the Etherian homeworld, and Betty was supposed to use that time to learn enough about alien culture to avoid embarrassing herself in front of High Matriarch Valandra. "Let's start with the basics," Lisa said, leading Betty to a comfortable seating area. Etherian society is built around the concept of mental harmony. They believe that thoughts and emotions should be controlled and channeled for the greater good of their communities. Betty nodded, though privately she wondered how anyone could control their emotions all the time. Zara mentioned that they're telepathic. "Will I be able to communicate with them?" "Most Etherians can sense your emotional state, but only the most powerful can actually read thoughts," Lisa explained. "High Matriarch Valandra is one of the strongest telepaths in their society. She'll know immediately if you're lying or trying to hide something." "Well, that's terrifying," Betty muttered. "I've never been good at hiding my feelings anyway." Lisa smiled. "That might actually work in your favor. Etherians value honesty above almost everything else. The fact that you're genuinely nervous about meeting her will probably be seen as appropriate respect over the next 2 days." Betty threw herself into learning everything she could about Etherian culture. She studied their history, their art, their complex social structures. She learned that their society was ruled by powerful matriarchs who had guided their people for thousands of years. She discovered that family bonds were considered sacred and that the approval of both matriarchs was essential for any bonding ceremony. The resonance ceremony is the most important part of their bonding ritual, Lisa explained as they sat in the ship's library. It's where the families of the bonded pair must harmonize their mental energies. If the families cannot achieve resonance, the bonding is considered impossible. What does that mean exactly? Betty asked, feeling more confused than ever. Think of it like singing in harmony, Lisa said. Everyone's thoughts and emotions must blend together to create something beautiful. If there's discord or conflict, the ceremony fails. Betty rubbed her temples. How am I supposed to harmonize with people who can read my mind when I don't even know what I'm thinking half the time? That's what we need to work on, Lisa said gently. Etherians practice meditation techniques to achieve mental clarity. I'd like to teach you some basic exercises. The meditation training was harder than anything Betty had ever attempted. She was used to keeping busy, to filling her days with cooking and gardening and taking care of others. Sitting still and trying to empty her mind felt impossible at first. I can't do this, Betty said after her third failed attempt. My brain won't shut up. I keep thinking about what I need to buy at the grocery store and whether I remembered to turn off the stove. That's normal, Lisa assured her. Even experienced meditators struggle with wandering thoughts. The key is not to fight them, but to acknowledge them and let them pass slowly. With Lisa's patient guidance, Betty began to find moments of peace in the chaos of her thoughts. She learned to focus on her breathing, to let her worries drift away like clouds in the sky. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jake visited her training sessions whenever he could, offering encouragement and sharing what he had learned during his own diplomatic training. You're doing great, Mom, he said after watching her achieve a few minutes of successful meditation. Better than I did when I first started. I'm just worried about disappointing Zara, Betty admitted. She's been so patient with me, explaining everything about her culture. I don't want to mess this up for you two. You won't, Jake said firmly. Just be yourself. That's all anyone can ask. But Betty wasn't sure that being herself would be enough. The more she learned about Etherian society, the more she realized how different their worlds were. Etherians valued intellectual achievement and mental discipline above all else. They had no concept of comfort food or bedtime stories or the messy, chaotic love that held human families together. Zara joined them for dinner on the third night, and Betty noticed that her future daughter-in-law seemed more tense than usual. Her normally steady blue glow flickered with anxious patterns that even Betty had learned to recognize. Are you worried about seeing your mother again? Betty asked gently. Zara nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the soft lighting of the dining room. I have not been home in over 2 years. My mother was not pleased when I accepted the diplomatic assignment that brought me to human space. She believed it was beneath my station. What's your station exactly? Betty asked. I mean, I know you're important, but I'm still not sure how important. Zara is third in line to rule the entire Etherian civilization, Jake said quietly. Her mother controls 12 star systems. Betty nearly choked on her water. 12 star systems? How many people is that? Approximately 40 billion Etherians, Zara said, as if she were discussing the weather. My mother is one of the most powerful beings in known space. Oh, Betty said weakly. Well, that's not intimidating at all. The next morning, Betty woke to find that they had entered the Silthara system. Through her cabin window, she could see the Etherian homeworld growing larger, and the sight took her breath away. The planet seemed to glow with soft blue light, and she could make out the crystalline structures that Zara had described floating in the upper atmosphere. It's beautiful, she whispered as Jake and Zara joined her at the window. Wait until you see the aurora storms, Zara said, her voice filled with homesickness. They paint the sky in colors that have no names. As they descended toward the planet's surface, Betty felt her nervousness return full force. The meditation training had helped, but she still felt like a small-town teacher about to meet the queen of the universe, which, she realized, wasn't far from the truth. Dr. Chang briefed her one final time as they prepared to disembark. Remember, bow when you're introduced, but don't look directly into her eyes until she gives you permission. Speak only when spoken to, and always address her as High Matriarch. Most importantly, don't try to hide your emotions. She'll sense them anyway, and deception is considered the greatest insult in Etherian culture. What if my emotions are pure? Terror? Betty asked. Then be honestly terrified, Lisa said with a smile. She'll respect your honesty more than false bravery. The landing pad was made of some kind of crystal that rang like a bell when the ship touched down. As they walked down the ramp, Betty felt the strange sensation of the planet's artificial gravity adjusting to her human physiology. Everything around her seemed to shimmer and glow, as if the very air was infused with starlight. Waiting for them was a group of Etherian officials, all tall and elegant with their characteristic blue luminescence. At their head stood a figure that made Betty's breath catch in her throat. High Matriarch Valandra was imposing in a way that had nothing to do with her physical appearance. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her silver-white hair flowing like liquid mercury, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. My daughter, Valandra said, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely process. You have returned, Zara. Step forward and perform the complex bow that involved precise hand movements and a specific angle of her head. High Matriarch, I present my intended bondmate, Jake Morrison of Earth, and his mother, Betty Morrison. Jake bowed as he had been. Taut, his movements stiff but respectful. Betty tried to copy him, hoping she was getting it right. When she straightened, she found herself looking directly into Valandra's ancient eyes. So, the High Matriarch said, her gaze boring into Betty's soul, you are the human who believes. She can join our families. Betty felt every meditation lesson flee from her mind as she stared into those silver depths. This was it, the moment that would determine whether her son's happiness was possible. She thought of Jake's nervous smile, of Zara's gentle kindness, of the love that had brought them all to this alien world. Yes, Your Majesty, Betty said, using the wrong title but speaking from her heart. I believe love is stronger than the differences between us. High Matriarch Valandra studied her for a long moment, and Betty wondered if she had just doomed her son's future with her clumsy words. Then, to everyone's surprise, the corners of the alien ruler's mouth turned up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. We shall see, Betty Morrison of Earth, she said. We shall see. The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with a gentle hum that did nothing to calm Jake's nerves. Beside him, Zara sat perfectly still, her blue skin slightly paler than usual as she watched the planet grow larger through the viewport. This was her first time visiting Earth, and Jake could feel the tension radiating from her despite her attempts to remain composed. She's going to love you, Jake said for the 10th time since they had left the orbital station. Mom has been asking about you for months. Zara turned her silver eyes toward him, and Jake caught a flicker of uncertainty that she rarely showed. Your mother has never met an Etherian before. What if my appearance frightens her? What if she cannot accept what I am? Jake took her hand, feeling the slight electric tingle that always accompanied her touch. My mom raised me to judge people by their hearts, not their looks. She'll see what I see. The shuttle landed at Denver Spaceport. With a soft thud that made Zara grip her seat, Jake helped her stand, noticing how she moved with careful grace despite her obvious nervousness. Her formal diplomatic robes had been replaced with a simple blue dress that Jake had helped her choose, something that would seem less alien to his mother while still honoring her cultural preferences. Betty Morrison waited in the arrival lounge, her graying hair neatly styled and her best dress pressed for the occasion. At 62, she was still the energetic woman who had worked 2 jobs to raise Jake alone after his father's death. When she saw her son emerge from the boarding tunnel, her face lit up with the warm smile that had always been his anchor. Then she saw Zara, and her smile faltered for just a moment. Jake felt his heart sink as he watched his mother's eyes widen at the sight of his fiancée's glowing blue skin and ethereal beauty. But Betty Morrison had faced bigger challenges than meeting an alien daughter-in-law, and she recovered quickly. "You must be Zara," Betty said, stepping forward with her arms outstretched. "I'm Betty, Jake's mom." "Welcome to Earth, sweetheart." Zara stood frozen for a moment, uncertain how to respond to the casual warmth of human greeting. Among her people, first meetings involve formal bows and ritualized phrases. But something in Betty's genuine smile seemed to unlock her natural grace. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Morrison," Zara said, allowing herself to be pulled into a gentle hug. "Jake speaks of you often. Oh, call me Betty, honey. We're family now, or we will be soon enough." Betty stepped back to look at her future daughter-in-law, and Jake watched his mother's natural curiosity overcome any initial shock. "My goodness, you're even more beautiful than in the pictures. Jake, you didn't tell me her skin actually glows." "It is bioluminescence," Zara explained, her formal tone softening slightly. "All Etherians possess this trait. It reflects our emotional state and health." "How wonderful," Betty said, and Jake could tell she meant it. "You'll have to tell me all about it over dinner. I've been trying to learn about your people, but the computer files are so dry and technical." The drive to Betty's house took them through the Denver suburbs, and Jake watched Zara's face as she saw her first human neighborhood. The neat rows of houses with their green lawns and picket fences seemed to fascinate her. On Silthara, families lived in towering crystal structures that floated above the clouds, connected by bridges of solidified light. "It's so horizontal," Zara murmured, pressing her face to the window. "And the colors are so vibrant. Our cities are beautiful, but they are all blues and whites and silver. Wait until you see Mom's garden," Jake said. "She grows flowers in every color you can imagine." Betty's house was a modest 2-story building with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. The front yard was indeed a riot of color, with roses and daisies and marigolds creating a cheerful chaos that made Zara's eyes widen with wonder. "I grew them myself," Betty said proudly as they walked up the front steps. 40 years of trial and error, but they're my pride and joy." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming in a way that Jake had almost forgotten. The walls were covered with family photos, and the furniture was comfortable rather than elegant. The smell of Betty's famous pot roast drifted from the kitchen, mixed with the scent of fresh baked bread. "I hope you can eat human food," Betty said, suddenly looking worried. "I read that your people consume energy, but I wasn't sure what that meant." "We can process most organic matter," Zara assured her, "though we also supplement with light-based nutrients. Your son has been teaching me to appreciate human cuisine." They sat down to dinner at the old oak table where Jake had done his homework as a child. Betty had outdone herself, preparing not just a pot roast but also mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh dinner rolls. She watched anxiously as Zara took her first bite. "It's wonderful," Zara said, and Jake could see that she meant it. "The flavors are so complex. Etherian food is more about energy transferred in taste. Well, you just wait until you try my apple pie," Betty said, beaming with pride. Jake's favorite since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. As the evening progressed, Jake watched his mother work her magic. Betty had always been good with people, able to put anyone at ease with her genuine interest and warm personality. She asked Zara about her homeworld, her family, her work as a diplomat. She listened to the answers with the same attention she had once given to Jake's school projects. "So you can read minds?" Betty asked as they cleared the dinner dishes. "Not exactly," Zara explained. "I can sense strong emotions and intentions, but not specific thoughts. It's more like hearing the music of someone's feelings without understanding the words. That must be helpful in your work," Betty said. "Being able to tell when someone is lying or upset. It can be overwhelming," Zara admitted. "Human emotions are so much stronger than ours. When I first met Jake, The intensity of his feelings was almost painful to sense. Betty glanced at her son with a knowing smile. He's always been an intense boy. Even as a child, he felt everything so deeply. I used to worry about him. He has taught me much about the beauty of human emotion, Zara said. Among my people, we prize mental discipline and emotional control. But Jake has shown me that feelings can be a source of strength, not weakness. After dinner, Betty insisted on showing Zara the family photo albums. They sat on the living room couch while Betty flipped through pages of Jake's childhood, explaining each picture with the enthusiasm of a devoted mother. This is Jake's first day of school, Betty said, pointing to a photo of a gap-toothed boy with messy hair. He was so nervous he threw up on his new shoes. Mother, Jake protested, but Zara was fascinated. You were adorable, she said, studying the photo. Your eyes were the same even then. So full of curiosity and kindness. And here's Jake at his high school graduation, Betty continued. I was so proud. He was the first in our family to go to college. Jake watched his mother and fiancé bond over his embarrassing childhood moments, and he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the wine they had shared with dinner. This was what he had hoped for, what he had prayed would happen. Mrs. Morrison, Zara said suddenly, then corrected herself. Betty, I want you to know that I love your son very much. I will do everything in my power to make him happy. Betty reached over and took Zara's glowing hand in her own weather one. Honey, I can see that you love him. It's written all over your face, even if your face is a different color than mine. And I can see that he loves you too. That's all that matters to me. My mother may not be so accepting, Zara said quietly. She believes that bonding with humans will weaken our species. Then we'll just have to prove her wrong, Betty said with the determination that had gotten her through decades of single motherhood. If you'll have me, I'd like to come to your homeworld for the wedding. I want to meet your mother and show her that humans aren't so bad. Zara's eyes widened with surprise. You would do that? Travel to an alien world for my son's happiness? I'd travel to the end of the universe, Betty said simply. Besides, I've always wanted to see the stars up close. That night, as Jake tucked his mother into bed like he had done as a child during her illnesses, Betty grabbed his hand. She's special, Jake, she said. Different from us, but special. Don't let anyone tell you this love isn't real or isn't worth fighting for. Thanks. Mom, Jake said, kissing her forehead. I knew you'd understand. Now you just have to convince. Her mother, Betty said with a yawn. How hard can that be? Jake smiled as he turned off the light, but privately he wondered if his mother would feel the same way after meeting High Matriarch Valandra. Zara's mother was nothing like the warm, accepting woman who had raised him. She was ancient, powerful, and completely convinced that humans were inferior beings. But as he watched Zara sleep peacefully in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by his old posters and trophies, Jake felt a surge of hope. If his mother could accept an alien daughter-in-law, maybe there was a chance that Zara's mother could accept a human son-in-law. The hard part would be proving it. Jake Morrison stood at the viewing port of New Geneva Space Station, watching the stars shimmer against the black void of space. His heart pounded as he felt the small velvet box in his uniform pocket. Tonight was the night he would ask Zarathiel to marry him, and he had never been more nervous in his entire life. The diplomatic quarters of the station were quiet at this hour. Most of the ambassadors and liaisons had retired for the evening, leaving only the soft hum of life support systems and the distant chatter of the night shift crew. Jake checked his watch again and smoothed down his dark hair. Zara would be here any moment. 2 years ago, if someone had told Jake that he would fall in love with an alien, he would have laughed. Back then, he was just another human officer assigned to the newly established interspecies diplomatic corps. The Etherians had made first contact with humanity only 5 years earlier, and relations were still formal and careful. Nobody expected romance to bloom between species that had evolved on worlds, separated by hundreds of light years. But Zarathiel was different from the other Etherian diplomats. While her colleagues maintained the cold professionalism that their species was known for, Zara showed curiosity about human customs and emotions. She asked questions about things that other Etherians found primitive or chaotic. She wanted to understand why humans laughed, why they cried, why they formed such strong bonds with their families. The door chimed softly, and Jake turned to see Zara enter the observation lounge. Even after 2 years, her beauty still took his breath away. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, with skin that glowed with a soft blue luminescence. Her hair was white as starlight and flowed like liquid silk down her back. Most striking were her eyes, which held flecks of silver that seemed to dance when she was happy or thinking deeply. "Jake," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Etherians possess. "You seem troubled tonight." Jake smiled despite his nervousness. Zara's limited telepathic abilities meant she could sense strong emotions, though she could not read thoughts like some of her more powerful relatives. "Just thinking about us," he said honestly. Zara moved to stand beside him at the viewing port. Her presence always calmed him, even when his human emotions were running high. "We have been fortunate," she said softly. "Many of my people do not understand our friendship. Is that what we are?" Jake asked. "Friends?" Zara turned to look at him, her silver eyes searching his face. "You know we are more than that. But my people have no word for what humans call love. We have bonding, we have partnership, we have joining of minds. But this thing you feel, this warmth and joy and pain all mixed together, this is new to us." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a simple diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Then let me show you what love means to humans," he said, dropping to one knee. Zara's eyes widened, and her skin pulsed with brighter blue light. She had studied human customs enough to know what this gesture meant. "Jake, Zarathiel, ambassador of the Etherian people, will you marry me?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. For a moment, Zara said nothing. Her luminescent skin flickered through different shades of blue as she processed what was happening. Then slowly she knelt down to meet him at eye level. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will bond with you in the human way." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how the diamond seemed to capture and reflect her natural glow. When he looked up, he saw tears in her eyes. Etherians rarely cried, but Zara had learned human emotions along with their language. "There is something you must understand," Zara said as they stood together. "Among my people, bonding requires approval from both families. The matriarchs must agree, or the union cannot proceed." Jake nodded. He had studied Etherian culture enough to know about their matriarchal society. "My mother will love you," he said confidently. "She already asks about you in every video call." Zara's expression grew serious. "And my mother is High Matriarch Velandra of the Third House. She has never approved of off-world bonding. She believes that mixing with other species weakens our telepathic abilities." "We'll convince her," Jake said, though he felt a flutter of worry in his stomach. "Love conquers all, right?" Zara smiled at his optimism, but her eyes remained troubled. "My people have a saying, the heart may choose, but the mind must approve. My mother's mind is very set in old ways." They spent the rest of the evening in each other's arms, talking about their future and the challenges they would face. Jake told her about his childhood on Earth, about his mother Betty, who had raised him alone after his father died in a mining accident. He described the small house in Denver where he had grown up, with its green lawn and the old oak tree in the backyard. Zara shared stories of her homeworld, Silthara, with its floating crystal cities and aurora-filled skies. She spoke of the telepathic bonds that connected all Etherians, creating a network of shared consciousness that humans could barely imagine. She described the formal ceremonies and ancient traditions that govern every aspect of Etherian life. "Will I fit into your world?" Jake asked as they watched the stars wheel slowly past the viewport. "Will I fit into yours?" Zara replied, intertwining her fingers with his dot. The next morning brought chaos. Despite their attempts to keep the engagement secret, word had leaked to the galactic media networks. Jake's communication terminal chimed constantly with requests for interviews and statements. The headline on the morning news feeds read, "First Human-Alien Engagement Rocks Diplomatic Community, Ambassador Harrison." Jake's supervisor called him into his office before the morning briefing. The older man looked tired and stressed as he gestured for Jake to sit down. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer," Harrison said. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "The political implications are staggering." "I love her, sir," Jake replied simply. "And she loves me." Harrison rubbed his temples. "Love is a wonderful thing, Lieutenant, but we're talking about the first interspecies marriage in human history. There will be protests, investigations, media circuses. Both governments will be watching every move you make." "I understand the risks," Jake said. "But someone has to be first. Someone has to show that humans and Etherians can build a future together." The ambassador studied him for a long moment. "You know, when I was your age, I thought love could solve everything too. Maybe it can." He leaned back in his chair. "You have my support, Jake, but you're going to need more than that. You're going to need a miracle." That afternoon, Jake and Zara held a joint press conference. The questions came fast and sharp from reporters of both species. Human journalists wanted to know about the physical aspects of the relationship, while Etherian correspondents focused on the cultural implications. Through it all, Jake and Zara stood together, answering with dignity and grace. "Do you really believe this marriage can work?" asked a reporter from Earth News Network. Jake looked at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. "I believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe," he said. "It brought our species together across the vast emptiness of space. It can bring two hearts together across any distance." As the conference ended, Jake felt a mixture of hope and fear. They had taken the first step, but the hardest part lay ahead. Soon, they would have to face their families, their traditions, and the weight of history itself. The ring on Zara's finger caught the light as she took his hand. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together.